I found a single line item buried in an HOA financial report, 6 words that didn't make sense. 3 days later, I had a folder of evidence that would end 4 people's positions on that board. By the time I was done, half the HOA board had resigned. Not because I forced them to, because they knew what was coming. If you love watching corrupt HOA boards finally get exposed, subscribe now, because this story starts with a spreadsheet and ends with an entire board collapsing. It started with something completely mundane. I'd just been elected to the HOA's finance committee, a volunteer position nobody actually wants, the kind you get talked into at a community barbecue because it's only a few hours a month. I figured I'd review some budgets, approve some landscaping invoices, and go back to ignoring HOA business entirely. Instead, 3 weeks into the job, I found something that didn't add up. Buried in the association's annual financial report was a line item labeled simply, Common Area Parcel C Disposition, $1, sold for $1, to an entity called Meridian Holdings Group LLC. $1. I stared at that number for a long time. HOAs don't just sell land for $1. Land, even small, unusable parcels, gets appraised, marketed, sometimes fought over in board meetings for months before anyone agrees on a price. $1 wasn't a sale. $1 was a gift disguised as a transaction. I brought it up at the next finance committee meeting, expecting a simple explanation. Instead, I watched our HOA treasurer's expression shift the moment I said the parcel number out loud. That was approved by the full board 2 years ago, she said quickly. Before your time. Nothing unusual about it. $1 isn't unusual to you? I asked. She didn't answer directly. She just moved on to the next agenda item like the question had never been asked. That non-answer told me more than any explanation could have. I went home that night and pulled every publicly available document I could find on Meridian Holdings Group LLC. County business registration records, property tax filings, anything that might explain who or what had just received an entire piece of community land for less than the cost of a candy bar. What I found made my stomach drop. Meridian Holdings Group LLC had been registered exactly 4 months before the sale. Its registered agent address matched a UPS mailbox store in the next town over, the kind people use specifically to hide their real identity from public records. And the LLC's single-listed manager? A name I recognized instantly because I'd seen it on our HOA board roster just 2 years earlier. Our former HOA president, the same man who had approved this sale as board president, right before conveniently stepping down and starting a brand new company 4 months before receiving community land for a single $1. I sat back in my chair, heart racing, fully understanding for the first time what I'd actually stumbled into. This wasn't a paperwork mistake. This wasn't an oversight buried in old meeting minutes. This was a sitting HOA president using his position to funnel association-owned land into a shell company he'd created for himself, and then walking away clean before anyone noticed. Except I had noticed. I spent the next 2 days quietly gathering everything, county filings, the original board meeting minutes approving the sale, tax records showing the parcel's actual assessed value, which was nowhere close to $1. Closer to $60,000. $60,000 of community-owned land, given away to a shell company controlled by the very person who approved the transaction. I knew the moment I brought this forward publicly, there would be no quiet way to handle it. This wasn't a disagreement over paint colors or fence heights. This was, at minimum, a serious breach of fiduciary duty. At worst, it was outright fraud. I sat at my kitchen table that night, folder of evidence spread out in front of me, and made a decision that I knew would blow apart the comfortable, quiet reputation of an HOA board that had clearly been getting away with something for far longer than anyone realized. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to the entire board requesting an emergency meeting. Subject line, Parcel C disposition, request for immediate clarification. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Within 11 minutes, I had a response. Not from a board, from an attorney. The email sat in my inbox like a small detonation. 11 minutes. That's all it took for a private attorney Not the HOA's usual legal counsel, but someone new, to respond to an internal email I'd sent to a volunteer board. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Someone had been expecting this email for 2 years and had a lawyer on standby the moment it finally arrived. The message was short, polished, and dripping with carefully worded intimidation. This office represents certain former board members regarding matters referenced in your recent communication. Please direct all further correspondence through counsel. Any public statements regarding Parcel C may result in legal action for defamation. Defamation. For asking a question about a dollar sale in an official financial report. I read that email 3 times, feeling something shift from nervous uncertainty into pure resolve. People don't threaten lawsuits over honest mistakes. They threaten lawsuits when the truth is the most dangerous thing in the room. I forwarded the attorney's email straight to my own lawyer, a sharp property and corporate attorney named Marcus, recommended by a friend who dealt with HOA disputes before. This is a scare tactic, Marcus said after reading it. There's no defamation in stating verified facts from public records and official HOA documents. If anything, this response just confirmed you're onto something real. Innocent people don't lawyer up this fast. So, what do I do? Exactly what you were already doing, he said. Document everything. Request the meeting formally, in writing, citing your role on the Finance Committee. If they deny you access to records you're legally entitled to as a board committee member, that itself becomes part of the pattern. I sent the formal request that same afternoon, citing my role, referencing the specific parcel, and requesting the original appraisal documentation used to justify a $1 sale price. The response came 4 days later, conveniently timed right before a scheduled community-wide HOA meeting, the kind where dozens of residents actually show up because free food gets mentioned in the newsletter. The current board president, a soft-spoken woman named Deborah, who'd always seemed more interested in avoiding conflict than causing it, called me personally the night before the meeting. I think we should discuss this privately before it becomes a bigger issue, she said, voice tight, with barely concealed anxiety. I've been trying to discuss this for over a week, I said. Nobody's given me a straight answer yet. There was a long pause. Some of this predates my time on the board, she finally said. I inherited paperwork I didn't fully understand until recently myself. That admission surprised me. It sounded almost like an apology or a warning. Deborah, I said carefully, did you know about this sale before I brought it up? Another pause, longer this time. I knew there was a parcel disposition. I didn't know the details you've apparently uncovered, which meant somebody had deliberately kept even the current board president in the dark about exactly how that sale had actually happened. This wasn't just one corrupt former president acting alone. This was a structure built specifically so nobody currently in power would have enough information to ever expose it, until someone outside that structure started asking the right questions. I walked into that community meeting the next evening with my folder of documents, Marcus's legal advice fresh in my mind, and a growing understanding that this story went far deeper than a single shell company. The meeting room was packed, more people than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting before. Word travels fast in a neighborhood, especially when an attorney's threatening letter gets mentioned to even one gossiping neighbor. Deborah opened the meeting with visible tension, glancing at me more than once as she ran through routine agenda items, clearly stalling before reaching the topic everyone in that room had actually come for. Finally, she cleared her throat. There's been a request to discuss the disposition of Parcel C from 2 years ago. The room went silent, dozens of eyes turning toward me. I stood up, folder in hand, ready to lay out exactly what I'd found. But before I could say a single word, a man in the back of a room stood up first, someone I didn't recognize, wearing a suit that looked distinctly out of place among the neighborhood's usual casual attire. Before this goes any further, he said calmly, I need to inform everyone here that I represent Meridian Holdings Group, and any statements made in this meeting regarding my client will be recorded for potential legal proceedings. The room erupted into murmurs, because in that instant, everyone understood exactly what I already knew. Whoever was behind that shell company wasn't just watching quietly from a distance anymore. They were sitting in the room with us. The murmurs in the room grew louder, but I kept my eyes locked on the man in the suit. He hadn't come to observe. He'd come to intimidate an entire community into silence before I could say a single word. "You're welcome to record whatever you'd like," I said, standing my ground. "Everything I'm about to share comes directly from public county records and this HOA's own official documents. If your client has a problem with the truth, that's not a legal issue. That's a them issue." A few residents actually laughed, nervous but genuine. The tension in the room shifted, just slightly away from fear and toward curiosity. Deborah, visibly uncomfortable but apparently done stalling, nodded at me. "Go ahead." I opened my folder and started laying it out, piece by piece, exactly how I'd found it. The $1 sale price for Parcel C. The actual assessed value, $60,000. The formation of Meridian Holdings Group LLC just 4 months before the sale. The UPS mailbox address used to obscure its ownership. And finally, the name buried in the LLC's registration documents, our former HOA president, the same person who had personally approved this transaction before conveniently resigning less than a year later. Gasps rippled through the room. Actual audible gasps, the kind you rarely hear outside of dramatic television, but which felt completely real in that packed clubhouse. The attorney in the back stood up again, sharper this time. "I want to remind everyone that these are unproven allegations." "They're not allegations," I said, holding up the printed county documents. "They're public record. Anyone in this room can pull these same filings themselves tonight." He didn't respond to that. Because he couldn't, there was nothing to dispute. The paper trail existed exactly the way I described it, sitting in government databases completely independent of anything I could have fabricated. An older resident near the front, a man who'd apparently lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, stood up, visibly furious. "So, you're telling us our own former president sold community land to himself through a fake company for $1? "That's exactly what the documents show," I said. The room exploded into overlapping conversations, anger, disbelief, dozens of separate side conversations breaking out simultaneously. Deborah tried to regain control of the meeting, banging a small gavel that suddenly felt almost comically inadequate for the size of what had just been exposed. In the chaos, I noticed something interesting. 2 current board members near the side of the room, a man and a woman I'd barely interacted with before, weren't reacting with shock like everyone else. They looked scared, not surprised, scared, which meant this wasn't just about one former president and a shell company. There were people still sitting on the current board who already knew exactly what I'd just revealed to the entire community and had said absolutely nothing until I forced their hand. The meeting ended in disarray, Deborah promising a full independent investigation. While residents shouted questions, she clearly had no ability to answer honestly in that moment. I gathered my folder and walked out into the parking lot, adrenaline still pumping, phone already buzzing with messages from residents who'd gotten my number from the sign-in sheet, thanking me, asking questions, wanting to know what happened next. But one message stopped me cold from a number I didn't recognize. "You have no idea how deep this goes. Meet me tomorrow. I have documents that will make tonight look small. Come alone." I stood in that empty parking lot, staring at my phone, feeling the entire story shift beneath my feet again. Because whoever sent that message clearly knew something I hadn't found yet. Something bigger than a single dollar sale. Something that was about to bring this entire HOA board down. "Come alone" isn't exactly a phrase that inspires confidence. I stared at that text for a long time before showing it to Marcus the next morning. "Don't go alone," he said immediately. "Whoever this is, meet them somewhere public and let someone know exactly where you'll be." I texted back, agreeing to meet at a coffee shop downtown, public, busy, cameras everywhere. Safe enough that even if this was some kind of intimidation attempt, nothing could actually happen there. The person who walked in 20 minutes later surprised me completely. It wasn't a mysterious stranger. It was one of the two board members I'd noticed looking scared during the meeting the night before, the woman mid-40s, clearly exhausted, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. "My name's Patricia," she said, sitting down across from me without waiting for an invitation. "I've been on this board for 3 years, and I need you to understand something before I show you what I brought." She placed a thick folder on the table between us. "I'm not proud of staying quiet this long," she said, "but I was scared. Not of lawsuits. Of them." "Them who?" I asked. "The people who actually control this," she said. "Parcel C wasn't a one-time thing. It's part of a pattern that's been happening for almost 6 years across 3 different HOA boards involving multiple shell companies, all connected to the same small group of people." My stomach dropped. This wasn't isolated at all. This was systematic. She opened the folder, revealing documents I hadn't even known existed, records of 2 other community land parcels sold under strikingly similar circumstances to 2 other freshly registered LLCs, each with vague ownership structures that eventually traced back to variations of the same small group of names. Every time, Patricia said, it's structured to look like a routine board decision. A parcel nobody thinks is valuable. A sale that seems too small to question. And every single time, whoever benefits steps down from their position within a year, disappearing before anyone connects the dots. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. "You could have brought this forward yourself years ago." Her hands trembled slightly as she answered. "Because after last night, I realized something. You weren't scared. You just asked the obvious question everyone else was too afraid to ask. And once you started pulling that thread, I knew it was only a matter of time before you found the rest of it anyway. I'd rather be the person who helped expose this than the person who got caught still hiding it." I sat there, absorbing the full scale of what she'd just handed me. This wasn't a single corrupt president exploiting one lucky opportunity. This was an entire operation, a rotating cast of insiders using HOA board positions specifically to funnel community-owned land into their own pockets, one small, quiet transaction at a time, protected by nothing more than the assumption that nobody would ever bother checking. "There's one more thing," Patricia said quietly, sliding a final document across the table. "This one isn't finished yet." I looked down at the paper in front of me. A draft resolution, dated for next month's scheduled board meeting, proposing the disposition of yet another community parcel. Parcel F, nearly double the size of Parcel C. "They're doing it again," I said, barely above a whisper. "They're doing it again," Patricia confirmed. "And if this vote passes next month like the others did, there won't be enough time to stop it before the paperwork becomes final." I looked up at her, understanding exactly what this meant. I didn't just need to expose what had already happened. I had less than 4 weeks to stop it from happening one more time. 4 weeks. That's all the time I had before an entire board vote would quietly hand over another piece of community land to whatever shell company was waiting to receive it. I spent the next several days working almost nonstop with Marcus and Patricia, cross-referencing every name, every LLC, every registered agent address across all 3 parcels. What emerged wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was a clear, repeatable formula. Identify an underused common area parcel. Get it quietly appraised low, or skip a real appraisal entirely. Register a fresh LLC months in advance. Push the sale through as a minor agenda item during a low attendance meeting. Let the responsible party resign shortly after, disappearing before questions ever surfaced. 3 parcels, 3 LLCs, 2 different resigned board members whose names kept resurfacing in slightly different combinations across ownership documents, almost like they were rotating which one of them appeared as the clean name on each filing. But this time, they'd made one critical mistake. They didn't expect anyone to still be watching by the time Parcel F came up for a vote. I requested another emergency meeting, this time not quietly but publicly, sending notice to every single household in the community, along with copies of the documentation Patricia had provided, carefully redacted where legally necessary, but detailed enough that nobody could dismiss it as vague accusations anymore. I Also did something I hadn't done with Parcel C. I contacted the county district attorney's office directly, laying out the pattern across all 3 properties, along with the pending vote on Parcel F scheduled for less than 3 weeks away. The response wasn't immediate, but it was serious. A financial crimes investigator reached out within 4 days, requesting copies of everything Patricia and I had compiled. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than any HOA newsletter ever could. By the time the community meeting arrived, the clubhouse wasn't just full, it was overflowing, residents standing in doorways and spilling into the parking lot, phones out, recording everything. Deborah, visibly overwhelmed, opened the meeting with a statement I hadn't expected. Effective immediately, she said, voice shaking slightly, I'm resigning from my position as HOA board president. The room went dead silent. I should have asked more questions when I took this position, she continued. I didn't fully understand what I'd inherited, and by the time I did, I was afraid of exactly what's happening in this room right now. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. She wasn't the only one. Within the same week, 2 more board members submitted formal resignations, both names that had appeared in different combinations across the ownership documents for all 3 suspicious parcels. The remaining board members, the ones with no connection to any of the shell companies, unanimously voted to permanently table the Parcel F sale, pending the outcome of the county's official investigation. I stood in that meeting, watching an entire structure of quiet corruption collapse in real time, not because I'd yelled the loudest or fought the hardest, but simply because I'd refused to stop asking the one question everyone else had been too afraid or too complicit to ask. Why was this sold for $1? As residents slowly filed out of the clubhouse that night, Patricia caught up with me near the parking lot, looking lighter than she had the first time we'd met. Thank you, she said, for not letting this disappear. Thank you for finally speaking up, I said. That took more courage than anything I did. She smiled, a small but genuine smile. The investigation's not over yet. There's still Parcel A and B to untangle. Years of records. But at least now it's actually being looked at instead of quietly buried. I nodded, watching the parking lot slowly empty out under the streetlights, feeling the strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity that comes after finally forcing the truth into daylight. Because in the end, this story was never really about land or dollar sales or shell companies. It was about how easily an entire community can be quietly taken advantage of simply because nobody stops to ask an uncomfortable question, and how quickly that same quiet system collapses the moment even one person refuses to look away. 6 months later, the county's investigation into all 3 parcels concluded. What started as a single confusing line item in a financial report had grown into a full criminal case, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and falsification of public records, spanning nearly 6 years and 4 different individuals who had rotated through HOA leadership positions specifically to keep the scheme running. The former president behind Parcel C faced formal charges. 2 other former board members, connected through Parcels A and B, were named as co-conspirators. Restitution proceedings began, aiming to return the actual assessed value of all 3 parcels back to the HOA's community fund, $60,000 for Parcel C alone, with the other 2 properties valued even higher. Patricia, despite her early silence, was never charged. The investigators recognized what I already knew. She was the reason the entire pattern got exposed before Parcel F could disappear too. Coming forward, even years too late, made all the difference in stopping the cycle before it continued. The community held elections for an entirely new board 4 months after that chaotic meeting. Patricia ran for a seat herself, this time promising something the neighborhood had apparently never actually had before. Real transparency. She won, along with 2 other new members who'd never previously served on any board, specifically chosen because they had no connections to any of the individuals or shell companies uncovered during the investigation. One of their first official actions? Publishing every single property transaction from the past 10 years in a public, searchable document, along with mandatory third-party appraisals for any future land dispositions, no matter how small or seemingly unimportant. As for me, I stepped back from the Finance Committee once the investigation concluded, Not because I regretted any of it, but because the entire point of exposing this wasn't to become a permanent watchdog. It was to fix a broken system, so it wouldn't need one person constantly checking for corruption in the first place. A few weeks after the new board's first transparency report was published, I ran into Deborah at the grocery store of all places. She looked lighter than I'd ever seen her during those tense meetings. I actually feel like I can breathe again, she said, laughing softly. Turns out resigning from something you never fully understood is a lot less stressful than pretending you did. I laughed too, genuinely, understanding exactly what she meant, because that's really what this entire story came down to. Not villains twirling mustaches in some elaborate conspiracy. Just ordinary people, some corrupt, some simply too afraid to ask questions, and eventually just enough people brave enough to finally demand the truth. $1. That's all it took to unravel 6 years of quiet corruption. Once someone finally decided a number that small deserved a real explanation. Sometimes the biggest secrets aren't hidden behind elaborate schemes. They're just sitting quietly in a spreadsheet, waiting for someone curious enough to ask why the numbers don't add up. If this story hit you the way it hit me telling it, make sure you're subscribed, because the next HOA story I bring you might expose something even bigger than $1.